Welcome back to my channel. Guys, here's Samar Malik. Today my video topic is, there are moments that never speak loudly, but echo for years. She hugged me, not like a friend, not like someone passing through. There was a stillness to it, an unspoken tension, a kind of presence that made it clear something more was unfolding beneath the surface. I held her briefly, then I pulled away, not because I didn't feel something, but because I didn't trust myself to feel anything fully. For most of my life, I've mistaken emotional control for strength. I believed that being distant was a form of safety, that keeping people at arm's length was a strategy for self-preservation. I never questioned where that belief came from. I only lived by it, repeated it, enforced it, until that moment when her touch disrupted it. It was just a hug, but it exposed something I had hidden for years. A man who has learned to suppress his emotional responses becomes skilled at interpreting everything through the intellect. He rationalizes what should be felt. He explains away discomfort, even when it signals a truth. He turns every moment of connection into a calculation, analyzing what it might cost, what it might mean, and how quickly he can exit before being consumed by it. That's who I was. Still am, in parts. And when she embraced me, I didn't experience it as closeness. I experienced it as threat. Not because she did anything wrong, but because I was unprepared to be truly seen. For many men, touch is confusing. It's not about technique. It's about presence. Most of us were never taught how to be present, especially in moments that invite vulnerability. We were taught how to perform, how to protect, how to win or withdraw, but not how to remain emotionally available when intimacy asks us to feel more than we're used to. That hug wasn't a test. It wasn't bait. It wasn't manipulation. It was something far more confronting. It was honest. She reached out without words, asked a question through her presence, and hoped I could meet her in that silent space. But I couldn't, because I was still at war with myself. The war begins early. Boys learn that the body is not a place to feel. It's a tool to endure. Emotional expression is monitored, often punished, or met with ridicule. Sensitivity becomes shame. Dependency becomes weakness. The need for warmth, for understanding, for touch, all of it is buried beneath a stoic shell reinforced by culture and confusion. So by the time a woman reaches out with softness, we no longer know how to receive it. We interpret vulnerability as instability. We mistake her openness for danger. And in that misreading, we miss the entire point of connection. I didn't mean to reject her. But rejection doesn't always require intent. Sometimes it's simply the inability to remain grounded when something real touches you. She leaned in. She waited. She stayed longer than she had to. And I let go. In the moment, it felt like the responsible thing to do. I convinced myself it was respectful, measured, appropriate. But looking back, none of that mattered. What mattered is that I wasn't fully there. And she felt it. That's the kind of absence that stays with you, the kind you can't explain later without sounding detached or defensive. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't cold, but I wasn't available either. And emotional unavailability is felt more sharply than rejection because it offers no clarity, only confusion. She didn't need a promise. She didn't ask for definition. She simply offered presence and hoped it would be returned. That moment made me confront something I had ignored for years. I didn't know how to stay with discomfort. Emotional proximity activated every psychological defense I had built. Jung said that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives and we will call it fate. That hug revealed the unconscious patterns that shaped how I related to intimacy. I had convinced myself I wanted connection, but in practice, I avoided the very conditions that allowed it to form. Presence isn't natural for the fragmented self. It's not natural to remain open when everything in you is bracing for abandonment. It's not natural to soften when your internal world tells you you'll be punished for it. But presence is required if love is ever going to take root. We underestimate how deeply psychological wounds shape the way we receive affection. We say we want love, but we place conditions on how it should appear. We ask for someone to come close, then judge them for not doing it the way we prefer. We interpret love through the lens of survival, and in survival, Closeness is never safe. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Some things are communicated in silence, in posture, in the way her breath slowed against me, in the slight pause before she pulled away after realizing I already had. That pause was the clearest thing in the world. She wanted to be felt, fully, not groped, not claimed, just met, and I wasn't ready to meet her, not because of who she was, but because I hadn't yet met myself. I walked away from that moment not as a man who missed an opportunity with a woman, but as a man who had just glimpsed the cost of being emotionally unprepared. I had seen, for the first time, that intimacy doesn't wait for permission. It appears. And if you're not available, it leaves. Most people believe intimacy is built, but it also depends on our capacity to recognize it when it arrives unannounced. I didn't recognize it. Or perhaps I did, but it frightened me. There's a particular fear that arises when someone treats you with emotional clarity. It confronts a version of yourself that still plays roles. It confronts your detachment. It dismantles your sense of control. It exposes how much you're still hiding behind language, distance, and certainty. Her hug offered none of those things. It offered truth. And when you're still fragmented, truth feels dangerous. That was the beginning of something for me, not with her, but with myself. A reckoning, an unraveling, a slow return to the parts of me I had dismissed as unimportant. I began to understand that my inability to receive love was not about women. It was about the relationship I had with my own inner world. The disconnection ran deep, and it didn't start with her. It started with early lessons, family scripts, and a lack of emotional guidance that left me believing love was something to earn, not something to allow. And when it was freely given, I didn't know what to do with it. So I let go. And that choice became a turning point. Not because it was dramatic, but because it revealed everything I still needed to face within myself. There are parts of ourselves we only meet in hindsight. Moments we didn't understand while they were happening become symbols of an inner conflict we've carried for years. The moment I let go of her wasn't about her. It was the expression of an unconscious refusal to be known. Every man at some point encounters a moment where presence is asked of him, not as performance, but as truth, not to prove his strength, but to surrender his armor. If he hasn't done the work to meet himself honestly, he will fail that moment, not loudly, not with violence, but quietly, by stepping away for what required his full participation. I thought I was being careful. I believed emotional restraint was maturity, but what I was actually doing was protecting a fragile inner world that had never been taught how to stay. The instinct to withdraw wasn't strategy. It was fear dressed as control. Jung understood this. He saw that the parts of ourselves we repress don't disappear. They become autonomous. They influence how we show up in relationship. They project onto the other person what we refuse to face in ourselves. I saw her need for closeness and felt burdened. Not because she was asking too much, but because her emotional clarity made visible how distant I still was from my own. She was never the problem. She was the mirror. Most men confuse emotional clarity in a woman for pressure. They interpret openness as demand. What they're actually feeling is their own resistance. The inner system that was trained to view intimacy through the lens of cost and exposure now comes face to face with someone who doesn't want to play along. She isn't trying to win him over. She's offered herself plainly, and that is what makes it feel so dangerous. True intimacy removes all excuses. I didn't know how to respond to her presence because I hadn't yet developed the inner capacity to tolerate it. And that is the quiet truth behind most relationship failures. Not incompatibility, not timing, but a lack of inner readiness. You cannot meet another at the level you haven't yet met yourself. Letting go of that hug wasn't one moment. It was the manifestation of 1,000 unspoken beliefs that had lived inside me unchecked. It was a belief that closeness requires sacrifice. That desire must be earned. That vulnerability invites abandonment. That emotions are temporary obstacles to be managed rather than signals to be understood. These ideas had shaped the way I interpreted connection. They formed a lens that distorted everything. Even when something real stood before me, I questioned its legitimacy, not because it wasn't real, but because I was unfamiliar with its language. She didn't ask me to fix her. She didn't make demands. She didn't beg to be seen. She simply stayed long enough to be felt, and hoped I would stay long enough to feel her. I didn't, and that absence was louder than any spoken rejection could have been. When a man disconnects in moments that require presence, it isn't just the relationship that suffers. His own psyche absorbs a cost. Part of him knows what he did, and that part won't let him forget. Memory doesn't always hold on to words or images. It holds on to dissonance. The quiet sensation of having failed to act when something in you knew better. That is what lingers. That is what replays. Not because you want to suffer, but because the psyche demands integration. It wants you to see what you couldn't see before, to repair what your fear once avoided. What I've come to understand is that growth doesn't happen through insight alone. It happens when you allow the weight of your past avoidance to be felt fully, not judged, not rationalized, just held. The part of me that let go too soon wasn't malicious. It was unprepared. But understanding that doesn't resolve the wound it left behind. It only opens a door to deeper responsibility. Self-awareness begins when you stop excusing yourself with ideas like, "That's just how I am." The moment I pulled away, I wasn't being myself. I was being the fragmented version of myself I hadn't questioned yet. To become whole is to see clearly how we fracture. It's to understand that love doesn't only reveal the other person. It reveals the limits of our capacity. And that revelation is often uncomfortable. But it is the very discomfort we avoid that holds the key to transformation. She felt something real. She expressed it without words. And I failed to meet it. Not because I didn't want to, but because I hadn't yet dismantled the internal barriers that told me emotional intimacy was dangerous. That barrier didn't start with her. It started with early relational experiences that taught me love was conditional. That proximity was always temporary. That attachment led to loss. When those beliefs are not examined, they run in the background, sabotaging connection not with loud refusal, but with subtle absence. It took me years to understand that emotional absence is its own form of rejection. When a woman offers you presence and you cannot match it, she will remember the coldness of your retreat more than the warmth of any words you later offer. The body knows when it's been left behind. The nervous system knows when safety has been breached. No apology undoes what was felt so somatically. You cannot be present for someone if your nervous system is still trapped in a survival state. You cannot offer grounded connection if your unconscious is filled with unacknowledged grief. You cannot hold her in safety if you haven't yet held yourself in truth. I've stopped romanticizing timing. It's not about meeting the right person at the right moment. It's about whether the architecture of your psyche is built to support what's being asked of you. She asked for very little, just for me to remain. And yet, everything in me said to move away. That's not timing. That's unreadiness. To be ready doesn't mean to be perfect. It means you made a habit of noticing your internal resistance and staying with it long enough to understand its origins. It means you've built enough self-respect to stop abandoning yourself when discomfort arises. Because if you continue to abandon yourself in the face of emotion, you will inevitably abandon others. Every failed connection is not a failure of compatibility. Sometimes it is the accurate outcome of an internal system that isn't prepared to be intimate. Her hug wasn't a symbol of romance. It was an invitation to transcend detachment. And I declined it quietly, unconsciously, but fully. Now I know what I couldn't see then. That emotional mastery is not the suppression of feeling, but the ability to remain conscious within it. That to love someone well, you must first learn how to feel without defense. That presence isn't performance. It's a discipline. She didn't ask for a future. She asked for a moment. And I let that moment collapse under the weight of my unexamined fear. I don't regret what happened between us. I regret what didn't happen within me. Had I stayed a second longer, had I allowed myself to breathe with her, to feel her heartbeat without retreating, perhaps I would have crossed the threshold I had feared my whole life. Perhaps I would have become the man I kept pretending to be. But I let go. And that has made all the difference. Not because it broke anything between us, but because it revealed what still needed to be made whole in me. If you felt something in this story, something you experienced but never had words for, This channel was made for you. We explore the unconscious patterns that shape your relationships, your inner conflicts, your desire for connection, and your fear of being seen. If you're ready to understand yourself on a deeper level, to confront the part of you that lets go too soon, to become the man or the woman who stays present when it matters most, then subscribe. Not for the content, but for the conversations that invite you back to yourself. This is a Stoic spirit, where silence becomes understanding, presence becomes power, and every wound is a path to wholeness. We'll go deeper together